If you're like a lot of people who live far away from Egypt, you may picture this land as a sea of undulating sand dunes, with some pyramids thrown in there somewhere. However, while it's true that both ancient Egypt and modern Egypt are surrounded by deserts for the most part, this picture of the sea of undulating sand dunes is not an accurate one for the majority of the country. So what were ancient Egypt's deserts actually like? And did people live there? Well, stay tuned because that's what we'll be talking about today. Welcome to the Dead Speak Online, where we demystify the words and lives of the ancient Egyptians through animated videos like this one. If you're new here, consider subscribing. In previous videos, we talked about the Nile and also about the Nile Valley and Delta, where most ancient Egyptians lived, and you can check the description below for links to those videos. Surrounding these areas where most ancient Egyptians lived were deserts, on both the east and western side of the valley. And these deserts were difficult to travel through, which helped protect Egypt from foreign invasions over its thousands of years of ancient history. To the west of the Nile Valley is what we call the Western Desert, and other than a series of 6 oases, that is, natural springs where water come up in the middle of the desert, the rest of the area is without access to water. And about 1/3 of this desert within Egypt's borders does look like that sea of undulating sand dunes that I was talking about. And that area is actually called the Sand Sea today. And it's located along the border between Libya and Egypt, that is the modern borders today. However, the rest of the Western Desert actually looks quite different from this, and in some places it actually can be quite spectacular terrain. The rest of the Western Desert is quite rocky, and even has mountains in the southwestern corner of Egypt. Now, in addition to the typical desert brown rocky terrain that you see around most of this area, there are also a couple of areas that have rather fantastical terrain, and these are called the Black Desert and the White Desert. The Black Desert, which is beyond Bahariya Oasis, gets its name from its hills that are covered in black stones and black dust. These stones are a type called dolerite and another type called basalt, which are volcanic rocks and were left here by volcanic activity millions of years ago. The surrounding smaller, sort of sandy areas around the hills are also coated with a black dust from these stones, giving the overall area a very black appearance. The nearby breathtaking White Desert features spectacular curvy and mushroom-shaped chalk deposits. Millions of years ago, the Sahara was actually covered by a sea, and when this sea dried up, somewhere between 2 and 7 million years ago, it left behind these chalk deposits. However, they didn't look like this then. It's only been over time since then, over thousands and millions of years, of wind and sand blowing, essentially sandblasting these rocks and creating these weird shapes. So it's almost as if you took sandpaper and just sanded certain parts and not others, happening from these patterns of the wind and sand that got blown around. Within the Western Desert is a series of 6 oases. That is, natural depressions in the desert where water comes up from underground, providing a natural water source in these areas. And these oases are called by 6 different names. They're called Siwa, Bahariya, Fayum, Farafra, Dakhla, and Harga. These water sources supported a variety of people who lived there and farmed. The people who lived there in ancient times produced a variety of food, and some of them were even known for their wine and exported it to other regions. Because the oases not only had water, but also had settlements that provided food, they were a critical point in the trade routes that ran through the Western Desert, and allowed trade with areas as far away as modern Sudan and modern Libya, and perhaps even as far as modern Chad. The oases and its surrounding areas in the Western Desert also provided the hard stones, like dolerite and basalt, that were sometimes used for making some statues and also for making various tools that were used during building projects. In addition, these areas also provided access to materials like gypsum, which were used to make plaster, and things like natron, which was a drying agent used in medicine and also for mummification. Now let's turn our attention to the other side of the Nile, where we find the Eastern Desert. And while the Eastern Desert does make it difficult to travel towards the east, in a similar fashion to how the Western Desert makes Western travel difficult, its terrain and geology is actually quite different from the Western Desert. It's dominated by a series of limestone and granite hills that run between the Nile and the Red Sea. These cliffs are what we call high desert, and some of them are so high that they even receive some precipitation during the winter, which allows actually a variety of vegetation to grow and can support animals such as gazelles, and also a number of people who basically live a nomadic life, herding animals through the area. And the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula also had a similar kind of terrain. The Eastern Desert and Sinai Peninsula were rich in a variety of resources that the ancient Egyptians exploited, and these included a variety of hard stones, several different types of metals such as lead, copper, and gold, and even semi-precious stones such as jasper, amethyst, and malachite. The cliffs of the Eastern Desert are punctuated by a series of dried up, very ancient riverbeds, which we call by their Arabic name today, wadi. And these wadis provided access not only to the Red Sea, but also to these natural resources in the cliffs that we talked about, so that ancient Egyptians could mine things like gold. Now, once the ancient Egyptians went through one of these wadis and got to the Red Sea, they could launch boats to visit nearby coastal areas, such as the Sinai Peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, and also the coast of East Africa. So while we may tend to think of deserts as barren wastelands, the deserts around the Nile Valley provided ancient Egypt not only with a buffer that helped prevent invasions, but also with trade routes, farmlands where people lived, and access to a huge amount of natural resources, which the ancient Egyptians then used to build their most famous monuments and artifacts, such as even the most famous one perhaps of all, the golden funerary mask of Tutankhamun. If you're interested in learning more about ancient Egypt, make sure to check out my other videos, especially the other geography videos on the Nile Valley and Delta and the Nile River. Also, don't forget to take a look in the description below where I have a list of books that I recommend on ancient Egypt. If you've enjoyed this video, do give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future videos like this one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.